Talent in Cannabis is the Flower Hire podcast featuring candid conversations with leaders and professionals shaping the cannabis industry. Each episode goes beyond job titles to humanize executive careers, exploring real journeys, lessons learned, and what it truly takes to build and lead in cannabis. Flower Hire, Talent in Cannabis. Hi, this is David Belsky, your host of the Talent Cannabis Podcast. My guest today is Jared Maloof, the CEO of Standard Wellness. Jared, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, David.
Standard Wellness. Tell me about this. What Standard Wellness is.
Standard Wellness. We operate in 3 states with an interest in a 4th. So our home base is Ohio. That's where we got our start. We also have operations in Missouri and Utah. And we also have a partnership with Standard Wellness in Maryland, where they operate as well. In Ohio, we're cultivation, manufacturing, level 1 cultivation, manufacturing. We've got 7 dispensary licenses, a 4th open today and a few under construction. We recently sold a couple of dispensaries in Ohio as we kind of sought to upgrade our portfolio. In Missouri, we have 2 dispensaries, cultivation and manufacturing. And in Utah, we have cultivation, manufacturing, and 1 dispensary in Salt Lake County. We've got about 350 employees, and our mission statement is to provide safe and easy access to cannabis.
I like that, and I've been very impressed with the team that you've built around you, and Ohio is an interesting landscape. Well, all of the states you operate in are their own landscape for sure. I mean, Missouri, you have a lot of the licenses that are controlled by 8 or 9 different groups, and you've been pushing to get vertical there, and have successfully. In Ohio, obviously you have some of the, we'll call it the big first mover, tier 1, tier 2 out of state MSOs that have some of those vertical licenses, and just as many, we'll say, homegrown Ohio companies that are vertical there. And we'll talk more about that market in a second. I'm always curious, like, how did you become the CEO of Standard Wellness? Like, what was your story before, and like, why cannabis?
Yeah, I get this a lot, and
I'm sure.
I tend to stick to the first of all. Thank you for the compliment on our team. Your team has helped us build our team throughout the years. So plug for Flower Hire. How did I get started? A friend of mine, a buddy of mine, his name's Kevin Murphy, not the Acreage Kevin Murphy, our Kevin Murphy. He picked up the phone and called me back in 2016. And he said, Jared, we're gonna legalize cannabis in Ohio. How would you like to help? And I joke, had he phrased that question somewhat differently, hey, Jared, you've built a pretty nice life for yourself. How would you like to ruin it? I would have answered it differently, but he phrased it the way he did. And I said, what the heck? Let's do it. It's a brand new industry with, just green space and an opportunity to kind of shape the future. And I jumped in. We applied in Ohio. I was working for Carl Icahn at the time. And so I didn't immediately leave my job with the Icahn Enterprises. After we got built out in Ohio and it became clear we were going to apply in Missouri and Utah and Maryland and New Jersey in the summer of 2019, that's when I said it's time to jump in both feet first. And I actually took the role as CFO of Standard Wellness. And within the first month or so, I was sitting in the CEO's seat, and it was kind of an involuntary move into the CEO's role, which I think we can get into a little bit later. But that's kind of how I got in.
Well, I think being the CEO of a vertical cannabis company is not an easy job, and you've been through a lot in that journey, which we'll get through a bit. But I like that. If he should have told me he was going to drop a bomb my entire life, and I'd have to figure out how to move forward and persevere. But 2019, 2018, 2017, that was like peak time for the license rush. That was still when the thesis of cannabis was like, let's get as many licenses as we possibly can, and we'll figure out what to do with them later. But right now we just need to get big, and this industry is going to be, it's the green rush, right? And then reality really set in 2022, I think, but a little bit in 2020, but there was a big COVID boost there, and all that stuff. So In Ohio, there's been a lot of excitement around the adult use market, but currently it's what revenue wise on par with like in Arizona, even though there's, Arizona's like 60% of the population of Ohio. Is Ohio's market finally growing and is it gonna get there?
Yes, I would say that Ohio actually it's growing in a healthy way. And many people were maybe disappointed with the conversion from Med Direct and the multiples of revenue that we did. But I'm viewing it as a much healthier way for an adult use marketplace to expand. And I wouldn't go so far as to say that the regulators have curtailed growth. I don't believe that's the case, but I think it's more natural. How many dispensaries were online? What cities had moratoriums in place? And then, we didn't have pre-rolls available right out of the gates. Now we have pre-rolls and we see a lot more store openings happening right now. I think we're at close to 205, and I think we'll get up to 260 within the next 12 months. So I think Ohio's best days are ahead of it. And I think we'll look back 10 years from now being pretty appreciative of the fact that we didn't just triple overnight.
Right? That was like measured growth, as frustrating as that can be for a CEO with a mandate to open up stores and trying to work through getting these boxes open. Looking back, there's some silver lining in there. And so you mentioned 260 licenses. That's for a state with the population of Ohio, that's not a lot. And so I guess that's why there has been a lot of interest in Ohio, because as you just mentioned, the regulations do seem to support more sustainability, just based on not only having retail numbers that aren't endless, so saturation becomes a little bit less. You still have some opt-out areas, and you're working through that, but there's also limited canopy size, isn't there? That might long term keep like a complete bottoming out of wholesale prices. Is there some uniqueness to Ohio's market from a structure perspective versus some other states that make being a producer more attractive?
Yeah, I would say there are, at last I saw, there were 22 level one cultivators and like 13 level two cultivators. The level one cultivators, originally we were sort of governed at 25,000 square feet. Now, given the advent of adult use, those licenses can expand to 100,000 square feet. And the level two licenses were at 3,000, and I think it's 9 or 15,000. But, from the level one producers alone, we can get to a capacity of 2.2 million square feet of canopy. So there is the installed base to fully support the entire state's needs, even if we get from 1.3 billion to 2.5 billion dollars of annual revenue. And I think what you'll see is a very healthy expansion of cultivation capacity over the next several years as the market grows. You're not reading about anybody going straight up to 100,000 square feet
No,
right
no.
now. And I think that's for two reasons. Number one, the MSOs, the large MSOs, who were maybe focused on what's going to happen in Florida and should I save my capital dollars for big expansions in Florida, that sort of had them tap the brakes in Ohio. Plus, a lot of them have busted balance sheets and couldn't take on a $30 to $50 million capital expansion in Ohio. What you have seen is some expansion of a lot of the more local players.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. And Ohio is actually interesting enough, one of the first markets where I saw widespread vertical stacking within the cultivation facility, or people talking about that at least because of that square foot limit that, again, operators are trying to work around. But I'm hearing less about that now with the ability to expand. So there's some good things about the Ohio regs. There's also some quirks about it, right? There's some unique marketing restrictions in Ohio I've heard about, and I'm just curious, like, what are they, and what changes are you and other operators really trying to work with the state to help make things a bit easier for you?
The interesting about marketing is it's different in every state that you operate in. And so you have to mentally keep straight all the rules in all the states that you do business in.
Right.
Ohio is an interesting case study. And one of the reasons is our neighbors up to the north have kind of the Wild West. And our governor made a visit up there and got off at an exit, and there were 10 dispensaries. And he said, not under my watch are there going to be 10 dispensaries and billboards
In
all
Morency, Michigan, right? Like in a town of less than 8,000 people.
right. Exactly. And so we got the 1 mile radius restriction as a result. And we got the "over my dead body will we see billboards" in the state of Ohio. There's no TV, there's no print. There actually, I should take that back. There is limited print and no real way to reach non-cannabis consumers, people that aren't looking for it. And that is challenging because the more you restrict the legal operators, the more oxygen you give to the gray market, the illicit market, or the out-of-state markets like Michigan.
Right. And there was some, earlier this year, I feel like Senate Bill 56, finally, I mean, I was in Ohio, I've been in Ohio many times. It's a really interesting state for me because you got a little bit of like West Virginia-ish on the right. You got like the deep South in Cincinnati. You got Midwest in Columbus. You got the Northeast, little mini Northeast in the top. It's a very diverse state in terms of culturally, I would say. But in all my travels, like there was 10 times many outlets to buy hemp-based products through last year than there were legal dispensaries open, and that bill was obviously fought for and try to curtail that. Is that seeing success to where the oxygen that was being taken out from the competition too, that had a weird gray area in which it was trying to get its products to consumers?
So SB 56 was passed last year, and there was a challenge to it from a signature gathering campaign that ultimately they didn't raise enough signatures to get it on the ballot. But that didn't stop them from filing a bunch of lawsuits. But on March 21st of this year, the ban on intoxicating hemp took place. And when that happened, we saw about a 10 to 15% uptick in sales into our retail outlets. We all expected more than that. The Ohio program was doing about $1 billion. We expected that the hemp program was about $1.5 billion. So more than 150% of the legal marketplace. So to get only 10 to 15% bump was a surprise. I think it says a lot about the consumers that went to the hemp shops. I think that many of those shoppers were illicit market shoppers that were converted into the hemp shops, but maybe won't choose to come into a dispensary. But something interesting happened a few weeks ago where a couple of judges issued a temporary restraining order and now a preliminary injunction to prevent enforcement of SB 56 against several operators. And even though the rulings were narrow to the operators that were listed in the lawsuit, the balance of the hemp industry has decided, okay, now it's the wild, wild west again. And so when you go and pass vape shops, you will see advertisements for THC again. Now, technically, they're operating outside of the law and they can be sanctioned for that, but they didn't care before and they don't really care now.
God, it's an ongoing issue. I think that speaking of relationship with the state, I mean, going back years ago, I think you were under investigation for a long time for trafficking, finding clones, like people were waiting outside your house, like they were, really messing with you. These were some, not nice people that may or may not have had a DEA background that were working for a department of Ohio's government that's no longer even part of the cannabis program. Anything you want to share about that? Was that like the whole like throwing your life upside down, like if you would have known type of deal that you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, remember when I went back to ruin your own life? Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a super crazy phase of my life that stretched a couple of years. Originally, the Ohio program was divided into two parts. You had the dispensary network, which was governed by the Board of Pharmacy, and then you had cultivation, processing, and the testing labs, which was under the Department of Commerce. And those two regulators didn't always get along with each other. And they constantly where is the line drawn? Where does pharmacy begin and commerce end? I think we all know in this industry, in order to populate a cannabis facility, you have to procure genetics. And in Ohio, when we started, you could either buy genetics from the illicit market inside of Ohio, which would have been a crime, or you could have bought genetics from outside of the state and crossed state lines with them. And that is also under federal rules, kind of like a crime. But every company has wrestled with how do you get genetics? Well, our regulator in Ohio took a keen interest in how Standard Wellness acquired genetics. And there was kind of a rough period where they were kind of seeking to discover all of our emails and understand more about it. And in one of their filings in Columbus, they had accused several of the people in the company of trafficking in clones. I think everybody knows that kind of trafficking and the trafficking of thousands of pounds are completely different things, but it didn't make it any easier to be on the receiving end of that.
No, not
And
at all.
so ultimately at the appellate court, we prevailed and it was very expensive. And you're right, they did have people at my house kind of parked outside to sort of intimidate us. And after we kind of prevailed, many of the operators got to work trying to help the state realize that they should streamline the administration of this program. And now we have the Division of Cannabis Control, which operates under the Department of Commerce. And so when the governor signed that budget into law, it was a real weight off of myself and a lot of other operators' shoulders.
Yeah, Jared, I'm sure you've heard similar stories out there from some of the first moving medical operators from other states. I've heard them. And when I started, I was just thinking that was like the California being chased in helicopters in the hills stories, or having, LA Department of Water and Power shut off your energy so you to bribe you to keep it on. Like that's what I thought, but it's everywhere. First movers in Michigan's caregiver market, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, almost every state, there's always this kind of, we'll call it rogue entity within the state government that's really aggressive. Maybe not for the markets that are getting online now, but I'm sure it's happening still. And so at least it turned into something positive to where you had a dedicated board and you started to get more common sense policy towards how do you source clones, that are not intoxicating so that you can run a business and they can generate tax revenue and all that.
Right. Exactly.
Man, Jared, I could talk to you about the Ohio market, about regulations, about being persecuted for running a state legal business for forever, right? But let's move on to some other topics here. As a CEO of a cannabis company, did anything prepare you? Was there anything from your past life of working for one of the most successful venture capitalists, investors in human history, anything that prepared you to handle cannabis?
I think, yeah, it's sort of like a relentless focus on making sure that you are not overspending. So many in our industry, and look, we've had our fair share of near-death experiences at Standard Wellness, just like many other operators have. But what set us apart was we never overspent. We had the leadership team that we could afford at the time. And the good news is that as we've grown and as we've continued to be a profitable enterprise, we've now got a leadership team that I would stack up against anybody in the industry. And again, thanks to help from people like you.
So just responsible financial stewardship was in your DNA, and that has helped you keep the lights on in the times that were the darkest.
Yeah.
You've built a great team, and thank you for the shout out. I genuinely appreciate it. You've been a pleasure to work with. But are there any positions that you wish you would have hired earlier than you did? Anything looking back where you're like,
Well,
you know,
yeah.
for some reason I waited on this, but I wish that we would have had it a year earlier or 6 months earlier because it might have been a different spot.
I would start with, I wish I knew better how this industry was going to unfold. Initially, the prevailing thought was the cultivators and the manufacturers are going to be the most successful, and that's the license that's most coveted. I underappreciated how important retail was to the overall company. And so I had Ohio, Missouri, and Utah manufacturing and cultivation, and I only had one dispensary amongst the whole of them. And so that led to some serious financial stress, especially in competitive markets where you need shelf space to trade.
No, that happens, really?
Yeah. So firstly, I would have been more focused on retail, more focused on real estate, more focused on site selection and honing in those applications for retail. And from the M&A perspective, I would have bought retail dramatically sooner than we started to do so. And what's interesting is as this industry evolves, I have a prediction that drinks and beverages are going to be sold through restaurants and convenience stores and grocery stores. And inhalables will be sold near where tobacco is sold now. And that gummies and edibles, this is the one I'm least sure about, but I can see those being sold near nutraceuticals. And so the bricks and mortars of dispensaries may become less and less relevant over time. And you're going to see the evolution of brands become the most important thing in cannabis. But specific to rolls, to get back to your initial question. Maybe not. You could see the liquor store model where high potency stuff continues to live in the dispensaries. Maybe flower never makes its way outside of the dispensary network.
Right. I mean, I live in the great state of Tennessee, and the only place where you find any state legal THC is a 21 and over liquor store with gummies and beverages, and that's state protected at this point,
Right.
because the alcohol distribution and alcohol retail lobby fought very hard to have that. And will it continue to just be 50 states doing their own thing, with the forces of the federal side of it? That's the big question. But you could very well be right, and maybe it will be akin to other CPG where brands are what matters. That's what people have been saying since the very beginning. And a lot of very smart people have wasted a lot of money thinking that they were building Diageo over the last 10 years, and that hasn't held, right? But the vertical strategy of having your own outlets to sell your own products through to guarantee you can drive revenue and having good location for those retail stores, that's a winning formula right now.
That's right. And so all that leads up to, I would have brought in a retail leader to the organization far sooner than we did. I'm an attorney as well, and I kind of thought I could handle all the legal work that we needed, and I kind of operated as our attorney. I would have brought in an attorney sooner, but we didn't have the money to do so. As a finance guy, like I'm a CPA, and so I thought I could do all the finance as well. And for a while, I could kind of wear all those hats, but I'm extremely grateful to now not have to have all those hats on.
Are you saying your superpower that prepared you, aside from being shrewd financially, was also being very smart and having a CPA as well as a law degree? That's a lot to find in one person.
It may have come out that way, but yeah. But we've also had so much incredible luck along the way. We've had times where I didn't think we were going to make it, thought maybe we'd miss payroll. That never happened. We've never been in default under any of our credit facilities. That's kind of rare in cannabis. And like one of the reasons why we are where we are doesn't necessarily have to do with, it isn't all about the people or the thought process. It's the states in which we chose to operate, right? Ohio, Missouri, Maryland, Utah, limited license, either medical or adult use states where margins are generally protected. We border Michigan, and I can't tell you the number of times where people try to drag us up into Michigan. And I am so grateful that we never sort of succumbed to that temptation.
Right.
And
it was very flashy and bright considering your location. Yes. So what about hiring the right people for cannabis? Any lessons you want to share? You've definitely hired some folks, maybe that have industry experience, but a lot of your key people, this is their first cannabis job. Like, what have you learned about how to hire correctly for this industry?
Gosh, what one of the things I've learned is that our employee base is extremely religious when it comes to the plant. And so their passion is off the charts. They don't often have like the business training that you're always looking for. So like things like supply chain and inventory management and, non-cannabis purchasing and all of those traditional things that it takes to run a successful business. Many of our employees don't have that background. So, and I'm not going to sit here and lie to you like that says we have the greatest onboarding and training program in the world. We're just like every other company. We're working to improve it, but installing leaders who do have some business IQ and kind of watching that IQ sort of travel through osmosis throughout the organization is cool to watch.
Man, yes, you bring in another member of the Super Friends, and all of a sudden you got more powers internally. You've also like many other of the Ohio specific cannabis operators that came from the medical program that had the tier 1 cultivation that have been able to, get to 3-5 plus retail. Standard actually has a lot of long-term employees that love the plant and believe in its values, but have also had the opportunity to move their career forward. Like, talking about culture at Standard, is there something about Standard's culture that enables upward mobility within the workforce?
I don't know that there's any like silver bullet that defines what great culture is. And I wouldn't even sit here and tell you that we have, a top quartile culture organization. We're always looking and trying to be better. And honestly, when somebody leaves Standard and goes and takes on a bigger role, there is no bigger badge of honor than that. And while it's hard to lose people, but watching people go on to be the CEO or COO or national director of wholesale of companies that I really respect, that means that we've prepared people for a life outside of Standard. And I'd like to see people stay and want to grow their career here. But if ultimately this isn't the right place for them, I want them to go and find that place. And it's super like, it's gratifying to see people succeed. And it also feels really good when people want to come back because you know you've built something special. And we've had a lot of those repeat return people. One of the things that we do every month, and I'm sure a lot of companies, a lot of your clients do this, we have a business review every month for every one of our markets and then for retail. And everyone's in the room. You've got managers, directors, VPs, myself, and then random contributors throughout the organization. And we are over inclusive into that meeting. And that's for a reason. It's because if I'm number one, we're trying to teach people about the entire business, right? Top to bottom, sales, operations, inventory, SG&A, HR, compliance, the whole thing. And having all of the future leaders be in that room, they get to see how their role impacts other people's roles. And if they want to become leaders, they fight for a speaking role in that particular meeting and they grow their presence there. And if they're not interested in a speaking role and they just want to be a fly on the wall, that's okay too. But at least if they leave Standard Wellness, they have a foundation for what the entire cannabis business looks like.
So much of what you said that I love. There's not a lot of Standard alums that we've talked to, but the ones that we have talked to, I will say nice things about you and about the organization that does speak volumes. I love the communication. In a business as complex and I will say volatile as the cannabis industry, transparency, communication goes a long way to building trust and enabling people to want to come in every day and feel like they're part of solving problems. And they understand the bigger meaning behind their work. So you're right. Some companies do that and do that well. And that's the most galvanizing thing from a cultural perspective that you can do is have that, what I would call transparency. And I'm not a culture expert either, but I do believe culture starts with the CEO. And so from what I've seen, you are a man of the people CEO. Like you're obviously in an office right now and you probably spend more time in the office than you would absolutely like to, but you do get out there and people know who you are when you walk into facilities. And that goes a long way as well, actually acting like you care about your people and having a genuine care for their well-being. I love what you said about developing careers, because ultimately, when all is said and done, if you can help a human being provide a better life for themselves and their family, like there is no bigger win, to look back on, I'm sure, at the end of this wonderful journey, right? Two more
Yeah.
questions.
I don't want to confuse you because like when I say I'm proud of people when they leave the company, that is not an invitation for you to start recruiting everybody from my team out.
Oh yeah, okay. No worries there. You're on the list of do not touch, and people know.
Just no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
You got to throw it out there, recruiter dig. Obviously, Flower Hire. We're Talent Cannabis. We focus on management, executive level recruiting in cannabis. And from my vantage point, there's more people working in cannabis than ever before. There's more jobs and more zip codes around this country for people to work in cannabis and earn a living than ever before. That's a huge win. That motivates me. It's like my mantra when I'm like, oh, it's a tough day. Well, Dave, it's go time. And that's what I tell myself. That being said, there's also more people trying to find a job in cannabis as cannabis careers have gone mainstream than ever before. You have any advice to job seekers that are trying to crack into this industry and want to work in cannabis?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you're flexible enough, right? If you're willing to start at the bottom and learn the business from the ground up, you will separate yourself from many people. In fact, we made a hire recently and has been doing an exceptional job. This was a woman who was kind of further along in her career and decided she wanted into cannabis and took a role as a butt tender to demonstrate to potential companies that she was absolutely serious about it. The guts that took had to be incredible. And I'm not saying everybody can do that. Not everybody's situation allows for that, but I would do what you do a lot. I mean, I would show up to the conferences, right? Hit up Ignite It, go to the OCHBS in Ohio and mingle with people that are in the industry. And I think you'll be very surprised that there are a number of people that are my peers that take calls from people who want to get into the industry every single day. I know that there's a lot of college programs that are now accredited for cannabis. I think that's a pretty good way to break in. I also think geographic flexibility is is important, particularly if you want to enter into a higher level role.
Well, yeah, so I like that education. You have the story of the person that it was brave to hire somebody. You're like, you're way overqualified for this job, ma'am. But they're like, no, no, no. I'll be your best employee, and give them the shot, and then they run through the wall and do it. I mean, that's kudos to you guys for seeing that, because a lot of folks would be like, no. I think that flexibility on location, like this is not a remote industry. If you never worked in cannabis and you're like, I'm looking for a remote job, it just won't happen, because the onboarding is very challenging, and you're only way to get on board, especially if you're in a department head or not a entry level position, which entry level positions require you to be, because they're all
Right.
proximity workers in this industry, right? But you have to be there physically to see and understand and do your job well, because the pace of it, priorities change so quickly, new information changes, and you've obviously done a really good job of centering your team around Cleveland, right? For that very reason.
Yeah, and it wasn't always that way, and it's hard. And take a look at some of the like higher level cannabis companies that have failed or are failing in the nation, or like in the past, the MedMens, the cannabis, great company, but ultimately didn't work out. The Botanist is going through it right now. They all had decentralized management platforms, and there is something about coming together on a daily basis, sitting across the table, and sort of I don't know, just the ideas that get generated when you're sitting in a room, the organic conversations that just spring up. So yeah, we are headquartered in Cleveland, and most of our leadership team sits here in Cleveland, and I think that's kind of one of our reasons we're in the spot we are.
I mean, it's one of the reasons why you don't have much leadership turnover, for sure, because they're impacting the business, and they really are part of the team. You mentioned something about your story about the person who was very experienced in their career that took a pay cut in a different direction because they really want to get into cannabis. That's actually my advice for entrepreneurs. I'm like, before you start something, go take a job, even if it's part-time, and like really understand what it's like to work in this industry, because the idea that you think you have that might work, like it might not work, and it probably won't. But B, you might actually understand something better if you work in this industry. And by the way, if you actually get into an industry, there's quick upward mobility in this space, because there's still with a lot of growth within certain companies looking to promote leaders from within that understand their playbook. So that's always my advice for entrepreneurs. Do you have advice for entrepreneurs? I respect dreamers so much, right? I was a dreamer. I'm like, there's no cannabis headhunters. Like that's going to be me. But do you have any advice for entrepreneurs that are really excited about doing something in cannabis?
I would say that understand your capital structure, understand how you're going to get from point A to point B. How much is it going to cost? And then you don't have to multiply that by 2, but definitely give yourself 25% cushion in getting there. Not everybody has to work 24 hours a day, but it would help if you were predisposed to not thinking inside of an 8-hour workday. Understand that you have more bosses than you ever will have in your life. I think this is probably the most important thing. Everybody thinks that if you're the CEO, well, you're in charge. That's actually the furthest thing from the truth. My regulators are my boss. My auditors are my boss. I answer to all of my employees. I answer to my vendors. I answer to my lenders quite a bit. You're never going to stop having a boss. That would be the advice.
All right. Well, last thing I'll ask, what are you excited about for Standard? What's coming up next that you're excited about as a business, that's on the horizon here?
I would say that we're poised for growth. We have a really good footprint. I'm really proud of the states that we operate in. In Ohio, like we're in a good place. In Utah, we're in a good place. And in Missouri, we're also in a good place, but we're looking to add additional retail in Missouri. It's a bit of all the headlines say Missouri is the greatest market in the world. It is the greatest market in the world for a handful of players. And if you're not one of those handful, you got to figure out, all right, how am I going to get into that club? So a lot of work this year, next year, and beyond is going to go into making sure that the Missouri operation is fully vertical. 2 dispensaries is not enough. And then as it relates to mergers or acquisitions, I would expect to read a little bit more about what we're doing in the coming months and years.
I'll be looking out for those announcements. It sounds like you're hard at work. Jared, thank you for joining us today. A lot of great stuff here, and I'll see you out there.
All right, man. See ya.